All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Kailey Hegedus. I will be your final presenter this evening, and I will be talking about the second language acquisition of consonant allophones in Mandarin. Okay. Okay. So my research question that I had for this project was, how well are students with English as their first language able to pick up and produce Mandarin allophones while studying Mandarin as their second language without formal instruction, and allophones being slight changes to consonants that we make whenever we're speaking for ease of articulation instead of changing the meaning. The reason why I'm specifying consonant allophones is because Mandarin is classified as a tonal language. So they have 4 tones with a 5th neutral tone. And with those come these allophones or changes. And a lot of research has already been done on allophonic or tonal allophones, but not much research has been done on consonant allophones. So that was where my curiosity was for this project. Good heavens. Here we go. Yeah. So the specific allophonic changes that I'm looking at for this project were voiceless consonants changing to voiced consonants, so whether or not your vocal folds are vibrating when you're talking. So the difference between ta and da. And this happens in Chinese as prescribed online with the second syllable of a disyllabic word in neutral tone. That word would become voiced. Then next we were looking at N-Assimilation. So N changing its place of articulation to a different nasal, changing its place of articulation to a different nasal based on the consonant that was following it. And then Coda is becoming onsets, where the rule prescribed was the first syllable's coda of a disyllabic word becoming an onset to the second syllable. I realize that this is not an allophonic change in and of itself, but it relates to N-assimilation, as we'll see later on. Sorry. That's all right. Okay, so where the data came from, I interviewed all of the professors within the department except for one that was overseeing my research, to confirm that the allophonic rules prescribed were indeed ones that they possessed, as well as 10 students within the program where their first language was English, to see if they had the same allophones as their professors. And for doing this, I used the system PROT, where I recorded the professors and students reading out the Chinese words, and then analyzed these spectrograms as you see down below. So my first result was for the voicing, and as we can see here from the data, we have the neutral toned syllables in the second syllable of a disyllabic word changing from voiceless to voiced for the vast majority of the professors and students. However, there are some unexpected things that came up. On top of the second syllable, on top of there being second syllable words that were voiced that had distinct tones to them, there are also first syllable words that had a voicing. At first I was really alarmed when I saw this, but there actually turned out to be a pattern. And that was that these syllables were pronounced with less emphasis, less stress than the syllable either preceding it or following it. So this created a neutralizing effect. So while the voicing allophone checked out with both groups, the rule needed to change a little bit. So it wasn't the second syllable of disyllabic words becoming voiced with neutral tone. It was the unstressed syllable of disyllabic words becoming voiced. Next, moving on to the N-assimilation. We can see from the first 2 blocks that for both the teachers and the professor, or both the professors and the students, that you have N becoming M when it was presented in front of M for ease of articulation, just like we do in English. However, it appears that in Mandarin, this N-assimilation is a whole lot more limited than in English, because in the next 2, where we have N changing to a velar nasal or N changing to a labial dental nasal, these 2 right here, they did not exist with the professors. For the students, though, at least for the Wheeler one, they produced it, not picking up that there was a limitation. On top of this, there was an added element that Mandarin has that English does not, and that is that N will become deleted or null when it is in front of a consonant for ease of articulation that way instead of morphing to it. So we can see this in the word kanfa, and also with the word miao. With miao, we'll see a little bit later why in front of a vowel it is like this too. So again, the rule checks out, but it's a whole lot more limited in English than it is in Mandarin, and only the students were able to catch up on those limitations. So finally looking at the codas becoming onsets, here it kind of looks a little bit random, where you've got some students producing the N to over on the onset of the second syllable, along with the professors as well for some words and others not. But there's actually a pattern to this too. So we'll just look at one word for time's sake today. And that is meow. For when professors and students put the stress in the second syllable, what they would do in order to make that second syllable a whole lot more emphasized is they would put a glottal stop in front of that vowel, creating a consonant or an onset for there to prevent the N from moving. If the stress was put on the first syllable, however, there was no consonant for over here to block N from coming over. So first syllable, you can have a coda becoming onset. If it's in the second syllable, you've got this new rule of glottal stop epenthesis, and you don't have that coda becoming an onset. So going back to where we had the N-Assimilation, where we saw meow, where that N was deleted, that is because you have this glottal stop serving as its consonant. All right, so the significance, going back to my initial question of whether or not students were able to pick up on these allophonic changes on their own studying Mandarin, or if they needed formal instruction. For the voicing, we saw from the tables that they produced the same voicing as the professors did for the vast majority of them. However, there was some random voicing that happened as well. So English is a language that has a whole lot of voice consonants. So it may have been just influence from English transferring over. And it was certainly the case with N-Assimilation and codas becoming onsets. As we saw with those, the students either over-applied N-Assimilation using more of the English than the Mandarin ones, not picking up on the limitations and the additional and deletion. And then for the codas becoming onsets, not always picking up on that glottal stop epenthesis. This study was not perfect. I had a small pool of professors and students that I was working with. And then the spectrograms, it was impossible to not have a whole lot of interference. So sometimes the little bar at the bottom would get activated when it shouldn't have. And then it was only myself that was analyzing these. So having a second or more opinion would have been helpful. And then getting bottom to the random voicing, if it was English influenced or if they actually were striving to pick up on the voicing rule in Mandarin. And that is it. Thank you so much. Any questions? Yes.
I know this wasn't a part of your study, but if you had to recommend how to make English speakers aware of these things in a way that was accessible to them, how would you go about it?
So it would be a little bit hard. You would probably want to have them study the language for a little bit first to practice around what the sounds, like the original sounds are in the language to begin with. And then perhaps, at least with the Spanish program, what they do is they have a class third year where they go into the specific allophonic changes within the language to help your pronunciation. So perhaps having a couple years of instruction so that way you're familiar with the regular phonemic inventory of the language, and then third year fine-tuning it with those allophones. Yes?
I know in the case of Spanish, we talk about the various different accents.
Yes.
So you would get a lot of complexity then too, but even within Mandarin.
Yes.
And beyond.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I don't think I have a good answer for that, but I'm curious, do you envision doing something like this with only Mandarin or with?
I would love to. It seems like it would be an immensely helpful thing to do and really interesting as well. Yes. I would like to. Yes.
Would it be possible to expand this research to the dialects of Mandarin, or are you thinking of doing that? It would definitely be interesting. It would be a little bit hard to conduct because there are just so many different dialects within Mandarin, but definitely would be interested in trying to do that. Mm-hmm. All right. Yes.
Do you envision that knowledge of linguistics, the concept of allophones, or seeing phonetic representations like spectrograms or things like that would help a language acquirer?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the whole scientific part of it would knowing without the spectrograms. I'm not sure would be necessarily all that helpful unless people were interested in dissecting their own language. But certainly knowing the rules behind what they're producing, I know that I found that personally helpful in my language acquisition with both Spanish and Chinese. So. All right.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.